Good afternoon, big girls. Today's video, we're going to be talking about 10 players that have been moving either up or down Dynasty rankings based on things that have happened super recently, all right? And I know what you're saying is things like rumors and reports should not shift a player's Dynasty value. I've got news for you. It does. It's just the way that the market works. It's the way that these fiends of Dynasty players function, okay? A guy looks like he's slimmed down in weight. He's moving up 6 spots in the rankings. So I'm gonna talk through a bunch of players that have moved. I'm going to tell you why they're moving and whether or not I buy or sell or just don't give a shit about why they're moving, okay? Some of them are contract related. Some of them just caught some extensions. Y'all probably know who I'm talking about already, but timestamps will be down below. My shirt will be tucked in down below. Suggest y'all do the same. Our new merch line just launched yesterday, actually. I don't know how many we got left. The orders are fucking flying in right now, but if you want to support the brand, these things are super fucking high quality. I love these shirts. They're like the only thing I wear nowadays, and hopefully our videos are the only thing y'all watch nowadays, all right? So tuck your shirt and hit the button that looks like this. Get it. First guy up on this list is Mr. Christopher Godwin, the wide receiver out in Tampa Bay, and his shoot up in redraft rankings at least, and plus a little bit of a spike in dynasty rankings, comes from the report that Todd Bowles says Chris Godwin is expected to play way more in the slot this season. One of the quotes was that he's an inside guy by nature. He can play outside, but he can make a living inside doing a bunch of things for us, and we plan to let him do a lot of the things that he does best. Now, per the Coach Speak Index, I don't know if you guys follow that guy on Twitter, but he does really good work. He basically follows what coaches are saying and then tells you the percentage of how much of what they're saying is reliable or truthful. It's kind of crazy how he tracks it, but according to Todd Bowles, his reliability rating is pretty fucking high, okay? And of course we like this move for Chris Godwin, right? And we come off last year where it was relatively disappointing outside of 1 or 2 games. And there's a lot of excuses to be had for him over the last couple of years. 2022, he was ripe off of that ACL tear. 2023, he actually ran 63% of his routes on the outside, which I agree is 1,000% not how you want to deploy him, right? When you look at Chris Godwin's career, the first 2 seasons that he spent in the NFL, he was deployed outside more than he was inside. And last year, the same, all right? Those were the 3 seasons in which he was deployed outside more than as a slot wide receiver. And if you look at every other season, his volume, his efficiency, his stats, his fantasy points were way higher when he was a primary slot receiver. And when I look at the report, I believe them. I don't really think they have a reason to lie about it, really. My one concern is, do they actually have the personnel to do that, right? Trey Palmer is a cool outside receiver who's really fucking fast and can haul in some deep balls, but he's not a primary outside receiver that you feel comfortable with if you're the Bucks being all right, we're in 2 wide receiver sets. It's Mike Evans and Trey Palmer. And that's not going to happen, right? Chris Godwin's still the 2 on the outside. I just don't know if they feel comfortable consistency-wise with Trey Palmer being on the outside. They also drafted Jalen McMillan out of Washington this year, who was kind of the forgotten guy behind Rome Odunze and Jalen Polk. And he's a cool player, but he is also 1,000% a slot wide receiver and much better operating in the slot. He's actually not too dissimilar from Chris Godwin. He is a lesser version of him, right? So when I look at this news, I'm just okay, in what instances is Godwin really playing more inside? Do they let Palmer become the outside guy while Godwin moves into the slot? Do they play Jalen McMillan outside more? Because it would make more sense to me for it to be Evans, Godwin, and McMillan in the slot, but who knows? And if they're running more 2 wide receiver sets, then Godwin's obviously an outside guy. I will say though, regardless, as much of the vibe for Chris Godwin feels like it's a little bit off. He went over 1,000 yards last year for the 3rd straight season. It just kind of felt useless if you were a fantasy owner, though, because most of his games 45, 55 yards. And let's just be clear, it was a 17-game season. He played all 17 games. And going for 1,000 receiving yards in a 17-game season is just really not that impressive of a feat anymore. And the man had 2 touchdown catches last year. I'd like to say it was a fluke or a down year, but he had 3 the year before that. He had 5 the year before that. So it's he's not really crawling past those numbers. And much of last year, as I said, he was carried by 2 games, right? He went 10 for 155 at Green Bay, 8 for 114 at New Orleans. And probably the most concerning part is just when Chris Godwin kind of bursts onto the scene, I think the debate of is it Godwin or or is it Evans' wide receiver room going forward? And I don't think we really got a grasp on that for a few years because Godwin played really, really well, actually outproduced Mike Evans for a year, 2019, whatever. And we were kind of at the standstill of like, who's better, who's the guy. Evans is the alpha right now, right? And I just never felt like there was real chemistry between Baker and Chris Godwin really at any point last year. It feels like Baker only had eyes for Mike Evans. And with Godwin, I mean, he got sneaky old, sneaky quick, right? He's 28 years old. He's not getting any younger. I like the player, but the rumors of him moving into the slot more don't really intrigue me much. So I'm not really buying the reports of him moving into the slot more. Maybe I draft a few more shares of him in redraft, but doesn't really do anything for me in Dynasty. Next guy up, Javonte Williams. Now, he has been a faller, the running back for Denver. Straight up, Javonte Williams was just not a good football player last year, right? And only crazy people really expected him to be. Like he was a 7th round pick in underdog drafts by the time the season kicked off, despite being like 7 months off a diabolical knee injury, all right? Just absolute fucking clown town behavior by the industry there. Regardless, though, Sean Payton, he's really on some shit sometimes, man. Like Jaleel McLaughlin, going to be a guy this year. I feel like Aldrick Esime, going to be a guy this year out of Notre Dame. I will say, though, I'm trying to play devil's advocate, but I'm trying to paint both sides so you guys can kind of make your decision, right? This is a tweet from Adam Leviton. A look here at the Broncos running back picture. Will Samaje Perine make the team? They signed him to a 2-year deal last offseason. He was useless last year, so I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't make the team. Can Javonte Williams, 2 years removed from the ACL tear, regain that form that made him the number 35 pick overall in the 2021 draft? And then is the Blake Watson hype our typical May undrafted free agent hype? So this dude, Blake Watson, who's an undrafted free agent, is supposedly just like blowing it up in camp. And there's a lot of hype behind him. The Athletic Nick Kosmider believes the holdover Broncos running backs Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, and Jaleel McLaughlin have a challenging battle to maintain their 2023 roles. Broncos head coach Sean Payton came out and said, we'll go by what we see when asked about the possibility of the team holding a running back competition this offseason. Not super inspiring or a lot of confidence behind Javonte Williams. And with Javonte Williams, like as a bigger back, he's going to rely pretty heavily on touchdown upside. And how much can we expect that to happen in 2023? How often are they going to be on the goal line, right? They were 21st in scoring last year. And I would say that like Russell Wilson probably played above his expectations if we're going to be honest here. So I think Javonte can be good this year, but I think it'll be despite Sean Payton if he does, not because of him. It feels like he's fighting an uphill battle at this point, and I'm not sure I want to bet on that. So I'm not buying Javonte Williams in the dip. I am just buying that the dip is legit on Javonte Williams, and I think there should be some cause for concern when it comes to Mr. Javonte. Next running back up, we got Najee Harris. All right, and this shit is actually hilarious. Reports coming out: Najee Harris looks trim, Jaylen Warren looks jacked. Jaylen Warren looked jacked at this time last year, whatever. The reports are basically it's just that very, very typical in the best shape of our lives in May, in June, and that's where Najee Harris is at. And as you could see by the rankings here, Najee Harris, like RB26 a week ago, everyone says that he is in the best shape of his life. Then he shoots up 5 spots in the running back rankings per keep trade cut, right? Listen, it's great. I don't debate that it's great, especially when a running back of Najee Harris's size loses the weight. But it's one of those things that I don't think you can actually really capitalize on in real time. It's almost just like you look back in hindsight and you're like, I'm really glad he did, right? It's like you can't really believe the reports of he's in the best shape of his life because everybody does. Everybody says that every offseason. But at the end of the year, when a player has a good year, then you look back and say like, oh, like he lost that weight early on. But it's just hard to tell what is real and what's not real at the time. I very rarely believe them up front because most of the time it's just fucking smoke being blown up our asses, right? So for Najee, I think Najee's going to be fine for redraft. I have very, very little hope for him over the long period of his dynasty career outside of, I guess I don't want to say all that because they could give him a contract extension after this year. It doesn't need to be like a first-round running back contract extension. It could be, a 3 for 18 mil, a 3 for 20 mil, and he stays in Pittsburgh for his whole career and has like a Joe Mixon-esque career where Mixon never really hit, in my opinion, his potential of like the athleticism and the upside that he showed coming out of college. But no doubt about it, Joe Mixon was an extremely useful fantasy running back for, the 6-7 years that he spent in Cincinnati, averaging over 20 touches a game for his entire career. So Najee can kind of be in that mold, maybe a little bit of a lesser version for him. So I think buying the spike of him shooting up because of he's in the best shape of his life narratives are fucking insane, and I would never buy those. But I think Najee Harris is an okay purchase in Dynasty right now because you're getting him at like RB 24, 25 in that range. Next guy up on this list, we've got a contract extension player in Jaylen Waddle. Gets a 3-year, $85 million extension. And this shit should be a surprise to literally nobody. He goes from being the wide receiver 15 last week, gets the extension. Now he's all the way up at wide receiver 10 in Dynasty rankings, according to Keep Trade Cut. This is the same shit that's about to happen to Tua. I'm telling you, and I've been talking about this for a long time, Tua is the quarterback 16 in Keep Trade Cut right now, despite being extremely young and just leading the NFL in passing yards. He's going to get like a 5-year, $230 million contract extension in Miami and then shoot up from QB 16 to like QB 10. All right. It's going to happen. It's not very difficult to figure out. And in tomorrow's redraft video, so if you're only subscribed to our Dynasty channel, we do a lot of redraft content as well. Tomorrow's video is my top 25 wide receiver rankings and tiers just for the 2024 season. I go pretty in depth on Jaylen Waddle and why I love him for a bounce back this year. And I think he's quickly becoming one of the best Dynasty values at wide receiver, where he was at wide receiver 15. Do I buy the spike? Yes. I believe Jaylen Waddle is here to stay. I believe he's here for a long time. And you guys should have believed that prior to the contract extension, but now he gets it and now he's secure. Same thing with Nico Collins. All right. Nico Collins got the 3-year, $72 million extension, which I thought was a great fucking deal for Houston, especially now with the Justin Jefferson news and him signing this massive fucking deal. Nico Collins is up 7 spots overall on Keep Trade Cut. He was the wide receiver 22 a month ago, and now he's up to the wide receiver 17, which I think is always probably should have been the case for him, right? He's a homegrown 25-year-old wide receiver coming off an 80-catch, 1,300-yard, 8-touchdown season, who now has an extremely accurate franchise quarterback that he's going to be tied to and locked up. Tank is obviously on his rookie deal, Tank Dell. Stephon Diggs is on a 1-year deal. But realistically, like when you look at who Nico Collins is as a player, the stats that he just put up, the quarterback that he's now playing with, and Matt Harmon literally yesterday just dropped Nico Collins' RP profile. Go check out receptionperception.com, one of the most valid fucking purchases in the fantasy football space, if you ask me. Nico Collins' numbers, 94th percentile success rate versus man coverage, 96th versus press. There are probably a handful, maybe 3 or 4 receivers who put up separation numbers like that in Matt Harmon's RP profiles. It is quite literally like Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs in his prime, Jamar Chase, and it's like Nico Collins is in that air right now, and you are getting him with CJ Stroud. There isn't a more obvious buy at wide receiver 22, at wide receiver 17. The contract makes me feel better. Like, yes, Nico Collins, I'm all for it, okay? All for fucking Nico Collins. I'm also kind of for the next guy up on this list, Jalen Tolbert, the Dallas Cowboys wide receiver. It's actually kind of funny. Like half of you guys probably might not even know. I guess if you're in Dynasty, you probably know Jalen Tolbert. But if you're kind of coming over here from the redraft streets, or you weren't that into Dynasty a couple of years ago, you might not know who Jalen Tolbert was. All right. As you can see from the graph, he's moved up like 15 spots in the wide receiver rankings over the last month. I low-key loved him coming out of college. He was a 3rd-round pick to Dallas out of South Alabama. We have Michael Mid-Gallup finally moving out of Dallas. He's over on the Raiders roster now, taking up some space and getting some exercise over there. And Jalen Tolbert's been getting a silly amount of hype out of OTAs right now for someone who, through 2 seasons, has gotten 39 targets and 24 catches. Not great. Not great for your fantasy teams. Pretty fucking useless. But the reports and the praise just pouring out of Dallas camp from Dak, from Mike McCarthy, from Brandon Cooks is all focused on Jalen Tolbert, right? Sometimes players that come out of schools like Southern Alabama like take a minute to acclimate to NFL players and NFL speed and all that kind of stuff, right? So maybe he's getting there. I think at this price, it's warranted. Like, let's go get us some Jalen Tolbert. He's a good route runner, tied to a really good situation, tied to one of the top quarterbacks in terms of statistics, tied to one of the top offenses in terms of statistics, who I think is going to lead the league or be top 3 to 5 in pretty much every passing category from a volume standpoint this year, because they have fucking Zeke and Rico Dowdle in the backfield. All right. So Dak's going to have to do everything out there. So I'm buying the Jalen Tolbert hype here. Let's move into some quarterback action. We have Jared Goff, who has moved up 18 spots in Superflex rankings on Keep Trade Cut, from the 67th overall player to the 49th overall player because of the 4-year, $212 million extension. I think the move up, the ranking spot move up, is extremely valid, all right? This was just one of the best performing offenses in the league last year, and we're talking about almost every category, right? And now they have added a ton to their defense. I think they just have a damn near bulletproof roster, and they're going to be very good for the next 3 or 4 years while he's under contract. And Goff is not like, no one's sitting here arguing that he's like the super elevator of other teammates, right? He doesn't elevate everybody else's play. But when you have Amon-Ra and Sam Laporta and Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery and a borderline top 5 offensive line, like they are the elevators. Jared Goff just got to walk into the elevator and push the button. The other guys are the wheels that spin behind it and push you up, right? So super valid rise in rankings. If you ask me, I'd be very happy to get Jared Goff at the 50th player overall in a startup draft right now. Player moving down, Kyren Williams, running back for the Los Angeles Rams. He is now down 9 spots over the last month of the season, from 61 down to 70. All right, and that is for a couple reasons. One, a couple quotes about Blake Corum and how they want to make sure that he gives Kyren Williams a chance to be fresh all the time. So they're kind of talking about how Blake Corum is going to have a role immediately. And then the foot injury news, right? He's been out of OTAs or whatever, voluntary practices, because he had to do something with his foot, which has now been like the 3rd injury that he's had with his foot ankle area over the last like 2 years. Now, I think I'm okay with this price. And I think the drop down is kind of valid now to pick 70. I think when we started talking about Dynasty content in the spring, he was like a 4th round startup pick, which was fucking insane. Like he never should have been going around Jonathan Taylor, even like Devon Achane, in my opinion, in Dynasty startups. But now at pick like 70, you're talking about the 6-7 turn where guys like, Isaiah Pacheco are going around. And I think that's relatively valid. So I'm not really buying Kyren Williams, but I think the drop in value makes sense. And I think the reports, or, the foot injury is a cause of concern. I think Blake Corum is a cause of concern. I think all those things are valid. So Kyren Williams, to me, makes sense. Christian Kirk is the last guy up on this list, the wide receiver out of Jacksonville. He has been someone who I've seen on like every trade target list in Dynasty recently. And I think what happened was we were, one, unsure about his injury from last year. We just remember he had a serious injury, and then we haven't really heard anything about him since then. And you just, when a player hits like 26, 27 and they start to get those injuries, you kind of just like let them slip down your rankings until you hear something good. And we've seen videos of him now full speed at practice. He is completely fine and playing with the regular first team offense out there in Jacksonville. The beat reporters, the beat scene out there is suggesting that he's the clear wide receiver 1, right? Calvin Ridley was kind of forced to be the wide receiver 1 last year, but it always felt like when the Jacksonville offense was at their top speed and top efficiency, it was running through Christian Kirk. And now with Ridley gone, Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. are obviously in there, neither of which have established chemistry with Trevor Lawrence, while Christian Kirk clearly fucking does, right? Christian Kirk is just 27 years old, which is it's not young, but I still think you have like a good 2 to 3 solid prime years left for a guy who's like Tyler Lockett, where you're just like catching balls over the middle and kind of falling to the ground. You're not taking a ton of huge hits on the outside. You're not taking a ton of blasts or anything like that. You kind of catch the ball and fall down. That's what these slot wide receivers do. So when Christian Kirk finally came over to Jacksonville and broke out in 2022, he had 84 catches for a little over 1,100 yards, okay? Last year, before he got hurt, he was on pace for 87 catches, 1,176 yards. So a better season than 2022, despite adding Calvin Ridley to the rotation, who had 136 targets, and Evan Ingram posting the second highest reception tight end season of all time. Got 114 catches. Zach Ertz has only been the tight end with more catches. That came out like that's not even proper English. Zach Ertz has the only season of more than 114 catches in a year. He had 116. So you're talking about Christian Kirk upping his statistical game while adding Calvin Ridley in his targets and Evan Ingram going crazy. Okay, so say what you want, but Ridley's now gone. I think Kirk has like a phenomenal year. If you could throw a mid-second for Kirk right now, I absolutely would. He is a rock-solid PPR wide receiver 2 for you. All right, so those are the guys recently that I've seen been moving up and down rankings, whether or not I think they're valid. I think one of the big takeaways here is, one, like, if you can predict an extension coming, which I think for the most part, it's really fucking easy, especially for like a quarterback. If they're not an elite tier QB, like we know the Patrick Mahomes are getting the extension, the Josh Allens, the Joe Burrows, those guys. I almost feel like, all right, you look at like Trevor Lawrence right now in Dynasty. Nobody fucking likes Trevor Lawrence in Dynasty right now, right? I think his value on Keep Track Cut is like 3rd round. He's going to get an extension and damn near fucking reset the QB contract market, all right? And then his value is going to skyrocket back up. He's going to go from QB 11 or whatever he is to like QB 6 or 7. It's easy as fuck. Dak's probably going to get a contract extension as well, and then his value is going to shoot up, similar to what we saw with like Jared Goff. So when you can predict the guy's extension coming, their value tends to skyrocket and shoot right up, all right? And also, I think the important part about that is not necessarily like, okay, his value shot back up right now. Now yesterday I was only able to sell him for QB 17. Now I can sell him for QB 10. That's not the correct way to look at it. It's not necessarily that you could sell him at that value in that moment in time. But what happens is now that value kind of stays put for a long time. That gives you a longer runway of being able to trade that guy, okay? So Jared Goff is, whatever he is now, moved up 18 spots. Now, he will slowly over the next 3 years start to move back to quarterback 65, but now you have a runway of 2 to 3 years where you're able to trade him at these values back to eventually where his value was prior to the contract extension, okay? So that's kind of the way I look at getting in on the contract extensions early on, because now you have 3 years of value where the guy's producing rather than having any sort of uncertainty behind him, okay? So there you have it. We had 9 players, I believe, if I can count correctly, which I'm not great at counting. Chris Godwin, Javonte Williams, Najee Harris, Jalen Waddle, Nico Collins, Jalen Tolbert, Jared Goff, Kyren Williams, and Christian Kirk. And again, if you are not subscribed to the Redraft channel, go do so. We will link that down below. We'll get in depth with Jalen Waddle. What's the opposite of slander? Praise. Praise in tomorrow's top 25 wide receiver rankings for the 2025 season. And make sure you go check out BDGE.shop because we've got the new merch there. Again, that shit is selling very fucking quickly. You guys get a special promo code, YouTube10. YouTube10, all caps, will get you 10% off your first purchase. All right? Subscribe to this channel if you're new. Hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video. I love you. I'm out.